Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are playing as the Dawi against the Empire, and we are in for a quite a bit of an interesting game. It's going to end up being pretty aggressive for the Dwarves, so regardless, going over the composition right away, I wasn't really sure. I was in a bit of a rush to throw together a list real quick for this match, and I decided, you know what, we'll try something a little different rather than just sort of artillery heavy and campy defensive build with Dwarves. Let's try something a little more aggressive. So I figured, you know, my opponent will probably go pretty aggressive himself. So it's not likely we'll see that much artillery from Empire. So, you know, a bunch of great weapons won't be a bad choice. So what I decided to do is I brought Grumbrindle for the flash bomb for the foe seeker, and Grumbrindle has no fear. Backed him up with a runesmith with Hammer of Cracked Trass, Rune of Negation, and Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and then brought a front line of Longbeards with great weapons with the Grumbling Guard anchoring things in the center. Longbeards with great weapons are not going to win against the great swords, but you know, they will give them a run for their money. They'll definitely put a little bit of a dent in great swords. If we compare the stats, they're pretty similar. The Grumbling Guard will beat great swords, I do believe, in a straight-up fight. So definitely the Longbeards are no pushover, so they can definitely do a decent job for their cost. And I figured with the support from Grumbrindle, with the support from the Runesmith, and Giant Slayers, perhaps, and Dragonback Slayers, depending on how heavy my opponent goes into great swords, I'll be okay. And I do have these 4 units of Bugman's Rangers providing some range fire. So if my opponent had gone handgun heavy, artillery heavy, as he did here, or even if I just need to chip away at great swords, these guys will do great. Immunity Psychology, Charge Defense against large, regen without any penalty, stalk. These guys, and decent melee stats. These guys are pretty ludicrous, so I figured these guys would be pretty decent. I actually just noticed this in the match that they've got like upside down beer mugs on their backs, which is pretty hilarious. But regardless, I immediately was forced to push in because my opponent actually brought some artillery and really caught me a bit off guard. Up in the sky you can see Boris, who's actually coming in with full kit. I don't really think against Dwarves that Foe Seeker and Deadly Onslaught's that useful, but that might just be me. For his main line, a bit of an interesting comp. He's got 2 rocket batteries, so these guys are immediately opening up, and you can see they're going to be doing some damage. My troops are clumped up. Now, my opponent can't see the Bowman's Rangers, but he can see enough to sort of aim. He can aim at my troops, and because of the splash on the rockets, they're going to be hitting. You can see on accident they're actually hitting my Bugmans there. Fortunately, this rocket battery, though, is mostly hitting trees, so definitely a bit of a problem there. The rest of my opponent's build very melee heavy. You can see a bunch of chevroned up swordsmen who will not do great against Longbeards, but they can take them a while to chew through. Some great swords who will beat Longbeard with great weapons. They'll do okay, especially against a whittled down guard, and they can definitely give me some trouble. Silver bullets, which normally I think they're a decent unit, but you definitely have to be wary that if your opponent decides to bring, say, a Rune Lord, these guys will be doing very little damage to the Dwarves. So be very wary of that. A Rune Lord, I think, between his Rune of Grungni and the extra magic resistance he gives you, makes these guys do like 60%. Against units nearby him, these guys will be doing only like 40% of their damage. It's pretty bad. And then my opponent did bring a Lore of Lifecaster with Regrowth, Earthblood, Lifebloom, and of course Power Stone. So regardless, the artillery fire is wailing away. It's definitely doing some damage. Now, fortunately, with this lip here, one of the problems with Hellstorm rockets is that they do terrible against units that are even behind the tiniest lip or tiniest little amount of terrain. Their trajectory is very flat. It's honestly, these guys really just don't have good trajectory. You can see here they're so flat that they're hitting their own great swords at this range, which is really just bad. And I do wish their trajectory would get at least a little different. I don't mind it. It's not an idea. Like, it doesn't have to be a perfect trajectory that arcs over terrain, but come on, here this point blank sort of friendly fire is ludicrous. They have a really bad trajectory, they've got a really bad spread, and my opponent hasn't really been able to soften me up all that much. Lost like 3 Bugman's Rangers, 1 Bugman Ranger, a few Grumbling Guard, but really nothing too fancy, and immediately hitting my opponent with Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and the Bugman's Rangers are opening up. Now, they are taking some return fire, but these Hellstorms are not going to last long. And you can see they're getting whittled down very quickly. Now my opponent does see an opportunity here. He's going to dive in with Boris. Meantime, I'm trying to posture around the flank with Giant Slayers, pushing forward with the Longbeards with great weapons. Going to engage here in the front line. But the one Hellstorm rocket crew is routed, and my opponent is actually going to pull back the second one because he realizes that I'm specifically targeting them out with the crossbow, so not a bad move from him. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually shortly going to shift fire. We do fire like a volley or 2 into the back of this Hellstorm rocket battery, but then we're going to change target to silver bullets. And in the meantime, this frontline fight has sort of become a little sort of slow and been unraveling a little slowly. You can see over here that's already fully engaged. The Giant Slayers actually got attacked by the swordsman. I wasn't paying attention when I was focused over here trying to get Grumbrindle and the Slayers onto Boris. while he was doing that. He actually got a nice little charge here on me with my Slayers. The Slayers will still win in the long run, but I definitely lost that charge bonus, which is a big mistake. And over here, though, I have whittled down these greatswords with Runes of Wrath and Ruin. You can see the Longbeards are going to engage here when my opponent wasn't paying attention, so he doesn't get his charges off. And, you know, things are kind of in an okay, it's an interesting position, sort of, because my opponent isn't exactly winning, but at the same time, I'm definitely being harassed. I'm definitely struggling to shut all his units down and taking some artillery fire. And you can see over here, though, Silver Bullet's having a terrible day. 4 Bugman's Rangers, even slightly whittled down Bugman's Rangers, are going to do a number on these guys. They just really can't stand up to this much crossbow fire. And you can see these guys just getting peppered down, their bodies lying all over the ground as there's some tumbling, and you can see that over half their strength has been shot away by that focus fire from Bugman's Rangers. So really, really rough stuff for the Silver Bullets. On the flanks, you can see Giant Slayers are getting the upper hand in this engagement, but due to the chevrons, the Empire Swordsman will hold that pretty strong. You can see similarly over here against the Longbeards. You can see with the buff melee stats, these guys actually have better melee stats than Longbeards, but it's just their weapon strength that's weaker. And their armor, of course. Over here, I do finally zone off the Silver Bullets, and we're going to crack the Hellstorm here. You can see the Runesmith having helped clean up these greatswords. I'm going to turn the Grumbling Guard inward to chase after these greatswords over here. And although my opponent is doing his very best to sort of shut me down with Boris, we are peppering away. You can see Grumbrindle still pursuing these swordsmen, getting zoned off, the Hellstorm getting shattered, and the Bugman's Rangers here just doing a great job. I did pop Grumbrindle Has No Fear. Unfortunately, a little too late for these Longbeards. My opponent getting an Earthblood there, but you know, my opponent's in a little bit, it's a bit of an interesting situation. My opponent has lost all of his shooting, so he's reduced his melee troops, essentially Boris, the Healing Wizard, and some swordsmen, but the greatswords are very badly mauled. At the same time, though, my backline has kind of clumped. I'm not sort of able to defend everything all that efficiently. Fortunately, because of their decent melee stats here, the Bugman's Rangers are going to hold. They're immune to psychology, so they're not just going to rout. You can see over here I'm actually opening fire on these swordsmen, the intent being that if I can chip away their HP enough, just do a little bit of enough damage with the missile fire, give them that leadership debuff, they will break, and then the Giant Slayers can massacre them on the retreat. And that's exactly what's going to happen here. The Giant Slayers are going to pile in and start slaughtering them. My opponent hasn't pulled his artillery crews back, which is a bit of a mistake. He could be remanning these guns, but regardless, we are still pouring damage into these greatswords. You can see they're hit by another Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Longbeards here holding their own. The Dragonmax Slayers mopping up these swordsmen, then pushing into the line here against these greatswords with Grumbrindle. So Grumbrindle, of course, providing his own sort of stopping power. Grumbrindle's an absolute beast in melee. He does a lot of damage, and definitely forcing these greatswords off. Unfortunately, though, my opponent still does have these swordsmen coming in from around the flank, who have been very slow sort of to flank, but definitely putting me in a bit of a rough spot. You can see my Bugman's Rangers here unloading on the greatswords, who are advancing into them pretty rapidly here, and unfortunately I just don't really have the stopping power. You can see my opponent here interfering with Boris, but these guys with their immune psychology, despite having a huge Griffin in their midst, they're actually going to hold their own. You can see the greatswords here are going to get into melee, but Brindle's going to come in from behind. He's going to karate chop these guys, and you can see over there he's down like 4 greatswords in a single swing. He's actually taking most of their aggro away from the Bugman's Rangers, and the greatswords actually rout within 2 chops from Brindle, so don't mess with the White Dwarf. At this point, things finally do start shifting a little bit in my favor. You can see over here the greatswords are starting to lose out. The Longbeards. Over here, I still do have 2 health units, or fairly healthy units. The Longbeards, we've almost whittled down the same our sons. The Giant Slayers here running down the swordsmen. And, you know, I still have a very healthy unit of Bugman's Rangers. There, I still got some okay HP on these Bugman's Rangers. And, of course, with their regen, they'll heal back up. Even these guys still have a quarter of their models, which is decent. They can get some HP back with regen. My opponent here trying to run around with Boris, but we do focus fire on him with the Bugman's Rangers, forcing him off. Of course, from Brindle isn't there, so good old Papa Gromby there can be scaring him off. And unfortunately, these Longbeards that routed, I didn't actually notice them to pull them back, but you can see, because my opponent, as he's trying to pincer me, his units keep getting sort of penalties for getting surrounded. You can see I'm actually going to use Rune of Wrath and Ruin on these swordsmen, partially to slow them down. You can see they've got almost no speed between the Dragonmax Slayers damage and the damage from the Rune. But also just to whittle them down, because these guys are one of the last major threats on the field. You can see I'm actually just running for dear life with the Bugman's Rangers. They've got 33 speed, which is better than swordsmen, especially debuffed swordsmen. And so I'm actually going to be able to run to clear and set up for new firing positions. You can see over here the Sigmar Sons, their courageous last stand here, the last 2 Sigmar Sons at 17 HP, getting chopped to death by a horde of angry Longbeards. You can see the last guy there going down. Definitely fighting proudly for the Empire, but too little too late over here. In a kind of desperate bid, Boris Todbringer does go in against Grumbrindle, but with the Dragonmax and the Runesmith in there and all those buffs and debuffs, he's just going to be getting wrecked. And you can see poor Boris there going down as my opponent's army completely falls apart. And it's going to be a pyrrhic victory for the Dawi. So definitely some mistakes were made with my deployment, especially the Slayers. I took huge losses against units that they shouldn't have been fighting, which was a big error on my part. That said, in general, I think the army performed pretty well. I don't necessarily think this is the most competitive against Empire, but you do have some tools against Large. You've got some tools against Empire shooting. You've got some solid tools against Empire armor. Grumbrindle, of course, does have his snare, which is really important. The Runesmith provides a bit of a snare and defensive buffs between the Hammer of Carrick-Draz and, of course, the Rune of Negation. So a decent army, and I think here they worked pretty well together. My opponent just wasn't able. Bugman's Rangers are so hard to break. Boris wasn't really able to do anything to him. Sure, he was doing some damage, but he just wasn't able to kill him off fast enough. The artillery wasn't able to kill him off fast enough, and they were just doing way too much damage. For my opponent's comp, a bit of, I think. The idea behind it wasn't necessarily bad. You can do a pretty arty heavy build, and I think you can do a very shooting heavy against Dwarves with Empire. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. But the use of swordsmen here, I think, is a bit of a big mistake. And first of all, my opponent's deployment was a little off. I think when he committed his swordsmen into melee, he should have done it so much sooner to keep them off his artillery. That way the artillery could have at least been pounding away at my Bugman's Rangers without interference, even if it couldn't help on the front line due to friendly fire. As it was, my opponent let me get way too close, and once they're close enough, always if you need, and I might do a video on this, on things to do about shutting down artillery, but once you're close enough to get your normal direct fire infantry into range of artillery, unload on it, destroy the artillery piece, destroy the artillery crews, get them off the field. And that's what I did in this situation. That's what I did against the Empire here. I took the 3 shooting pieces my opponent had brought and took them off the field almost in the space of a few seconds, really. Probably less than a minute, and I had all 3 guns offline. Had my opponent been a little more careful, he could have kept those Hellstorms just out of range, at, say, about 200 meters, and been pounding away at my back line, pressuring my Bugman's Rangers, and causing me some serious trouble, because he did have a broad enough front line to win, and these Chevron up swordsmen can hold okay against long range. They won't win in a 1-to-1, but they'll buy enough time to where my opponent could probably collapse my Bugman's Rangers, sort of mop them up perhaps, and then maybe mop up the Slayers, and then collapse inward on whatever's left of the Longbeard core. Otherwise, I do think there's too many swordsmen here. If you're going for just a cheap holding line, bring Empire Spears, even against Dwarves. It's cheap. They're 100 cheaper. Granted, they're not as good against shooting, but they are 100 cheaper. And if you're just looking to hold, they'll do the job almost as well. If you're looking to win the frontline fight, bring more great swords. Like for these Chevron up swordsmen, I can basically guarantee that these guys are each about over half a great sword. It's probably 500 a pop at least, maybe 550 for these guys. Probably about 500 for the 4 Chevron ones, 700 for the Sigmar Sons. Now, granted, Sigmar Sons aren't a bad choice here, but you could definitely, my opponent could have cut some corners a little bit and perhaps gotten, say, 2 spearmen or 3 spearmen and 2 extra great swords, and that would have, in my opinion, been a much stronger position for him. He could still suppress my backline between extra spears. He could still hold off Slayers. He could use the artillery battery to shut down the backline. The great swords would trade really well with Longbeards, much better than they did here, where they traded pretty well here, but there just wasn't enough of them. You can see 66, 76, but with only 3 great swords, and the fact that I was focusing them out with Runes of Wrath and Ruin with Hammer of Carrick-Draz's, and then even focusing them out with the fire from the Bugman's Rangers, they just really weren't able to hold up. So that's my 2 cents on the issue. Otherwise, yeah, it can be viable. Hellstorms can work. If I do artillery heavy building against Dwarves, I usually bring 1 Hellstorm and double up on Hellblasters, but it can work. So definitely a good game to my opponent. I had a lot of fun. Definitely was a fun matchup to play as the Dwarves in. And so, yeah, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it entertaining. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, anything like that, be sure to share them, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.